Coast's most accurate forecast from the First Coast News Weather Team, certified by Weather Rate, sponsored by AC Designs.
Well, Tim, it is hot with a capital H-O-T out there, and it has been all weekend. So I figured to start off on this Monday afternoon, we would kind of look elsewhere across the country first for a little bit of diversity, since we haven't had a whole lot of it here.
Talking about
across
diversity,
the First Coast.
though, wow. A little too much diversity, right, when it comes meteorologically speaking?
Yeah, very much so.
Wow.
For a lot of those folks.
Wow, what a satellite signature from the wrapped up one over New England and southeastern Canada, and then Montana and Wyoming. And man, you can almost see the dry line from the satellite picture, can't you?
Yeah, and I do have the dew points pulled up here then, so we're going to look at that to show just how, stark that contrast is between some of those dew points. So you can see pretty much from Omaha, Nebraska, all the way down into the Metroplex around the Dallas metropolitan area. Tornado watch in effect there, multiple severe thunderstorms warnings. We have several tornado warnings is now beginning to pop off just to the east of I-35 there in that southeastern quadrant of Oklahoma. So this is just to the southeast of Oklahoma City. But if we look at the dew points, you mentioned the dry line, Tim.
Wow.
Look how dry of air that is off to the west. Guyman and Woodward, dew points in the mid-30s, whereas if you just drive, what is that, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours east to I-35 from Oklahoma City to Guthrie to Stillwater, you're talking dew points low 70s,
Higher
mid-70s
than we have
even.
right now.
Yeah, well, even check out Idabel.
That's amazing.
That's down near Broken Bow. It's a
Whoa.
great place to vacation, but
And that's all going to get sucked north into those storms?
yeah,
Wow.
that is some juicy air.
Wow. Unfortunately.
So if you looked back, the actual storms are still out ahead of that dry line. So there's a lot of untapped energy still just off to the west of a lot of those storms. So the Oklahoma City metro area, Norman, Oklahoma, where the University of Oklahoma is, they could still be kind of in the crosshairs for some of these storms later on, because these are all just kind of warm sector storms out ahead of that dry line.
That's got to be a tough forecast.
Yeah.
Because, I would suspect even the time you spent there where it looks juicy and probably times where it's still gone, even though you're west of that initial line. But my guess is there's probably been some times where that initial line develops east, and that ends up being the line.
Yeah.
And you almost get like nothing, even though you're...
Yeah, because then you're kind of waiting for it to
Right.
pop off just to the west of there, and it never really does.
My guess is you're both eyeballing the sky, but eyeballing the visual satellite pictures.
Yeah.
Just to see if a Q line is developing. And
I can't tell you the amount of times we sent storm chasers out to like pretty much, the western third of the state.
Yeah.
And just sit up shop here. We'd have maybe like 3 of them from the southern part of the state to the northern part and just look west. And we would have live shots of the clouds billowing up, and then they would just flatten out, and that would be it. We tell them to come on back. They never broke the cap. And when, they do have some of those days where the storms do explode, and then you're on air for quite a while there.
now you should tell people what, when you say break the cap, you should tell people what you mean by that.
Well, typically there's the cap essentially just means you have a warmer layer aloft in the atmosphere that the surface, heating and instability needs to be able to break through. So if that cap's on, those clouds aren't going to be able to expand. That thunderstorm updraft's not going to be able to
For people who
explode.
haven't seen it, literally it can look like a cap.
Yeah.
Right? Those cumulus clouds are building, and then it just flat top.
Yeah. And then there's others where you see them building, and then all of a sudden they just explode up, and the cap is broken. So a lot of that's kind of due to the air that's coming off of the Rockies. A loft, anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 feet. We worked in a loft today, and Andy's not even here.
Andy's not even here. Jackson is doing doing the deeds. Since we're talking about it, and I'm not going to have many more opportunities to do this. When I did research when I was part of a research project, I was just an undergraduate, so I was one of the grunts. But basically, that's what that was. It was the High Plex project, the High Plains project, and they had from West Texas to the Oklahoma Panhandle. They had us, and this was in June. They had us set up right on the cap rock. And so we're trying to figure out, PhD students were trying to figure out, what is that ingredient to where some days it doesn't break the cap, and yet when it does break the cap, like you said, just get explosive. And in that project, they had us send it up on days that they thought it was ripe, not every day, but days where they thought it was ripe. They would have us from sunrise to dusk, weather balloon hits about every 2 to 3 hours.
Okay.
And we would do soundings from like southwest of Midland through Big Spring, Lubbock, up toward Amarillo, and then I'm trying to think of a panhandle town in Oklahoma. You probably
Guyman and Beaver are the biggest two.
okay.
Out
So
of the panhandle. Of
I think that was our northern extent. But I'd never. I mean, at A&M and Corpus Christi, certainly we would forecast those events, but I'd never actually eyeballed it. Right?
Yeah, you were never out there.
And to be out there and to watch it on days where it looked like it should, and the queue are starting like about 1 or 2 o'clock, but then doesn't do anything, and maybe you see some CBs well off to the east, and then other days where you're like, I'm not sure. And this is pretty primitive meteorology compared to now. But then not days you're not sure, and the queues start to go. But then, like you say, man, when it would break, wow. That's easily. It was post Texas where we were, which was 30 miles south of Lubbock, was easily the biggest tornado we had ever seen. I don't know if it's ever verified that what I saw with my friend there. I mean, became a friend because we were sending up weather balloons for 2 months in a row. I don't know if it was ever verified that it was a 5, but it was at least a 4 that was northwest of us, probably by 3 to 4 miles, and then went east-northeast, so stayed well north of us. In fact, well, you can imagine, because with it being like north-northwest of us, by the time it formed, we were already south-southwest. So our dew point was already dropping. So we knew we were in pretty good shape because there's nothing forming off to the southwest of us. But what that meant was, I think our dew points were like in the 20s and 30s visually. You could see this thing from where we were. It was just
From miles away.
Yeah. Now, fortunately, at least as far as we could tell, that pretty much stayed, because that's not a densely populated area, that pretty much stayed over the fields out there.
When that is something out there that I think the last registered EF5 tornado was back in 2011, but there has probably been one that has hit a lot of those grassy areas, because a lot of Texas, a lot of Oklahoma is open, ranch land or grassland.
Yep.
That storm spotters and storm chasers have had eyes on storms, but because it didn't actually hit anything, thankfully so, there wasn't any damage to give a rating on it for the most part. So I think they just do those EFUs because they don't really have any damage to go off of, which if only that was always the case. The other thing I was going to say about this is that makes it difficult forecasting-wise if you do have a cap in place. How do you tell people that? Because you're trying to let people know we have a really, really good chance of storms, and they could be very bad if the cap breaks.
Yeah, almost like we're either going to have nothing or we're going to have some really bad stuff.
Yeah, and that's really hard to explain to people.
That's why I can only imagine what it was like being a forecaster there, because I would suspect some people anyhow might, if it didn't break, some people would be like, you guys are clueless,
And there's some days where you have, let's say along the dry line, you might have 4 to 6 storms form. There's other days you might just have 1 or 2. And so, really when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, one of those 2 storms, if they don't hit a highly populated area, most folks think, oh, it didn't really even storm today.
Right.
Where you're like, no, we actually did have 2 storms. They just didn't happen to hit your area. But yeah, trying to tell people like, this could be a really, really bad day for storms. You need to stay weather aware, stay focused in on the forecast. And then the cap doesn't break, Now
here's
it's a tough thing.
I don't want to stretch this out too far, but here's a question that I have always wondered, and I haven't really seen the answer for. So when you have a line like is developing, and those are pretty intense storms already, right? But it's not too far to the east-southeast of Oklahoma City, and I don't think there's a whole lot of southwest to west right now. Can they create an outflow boundary that then helps trigger stuff farther off to the west and northwest?
Yes, if the area hasn't been worked over by storms yet. Yeah, which I think in this case, that could certainly happen, that the outflow boundary, the rear flank downdress perhaps out of some of these storms that are pushing back off to the west. That's going to be hitting air that still has dew points in the low 70s, and temperature-wise, it's still in like the low to mid 80s, I think, at last check.
So, like if you're in Oklahoma City, you might actually be watching for that boundary coming out of the southeast just to see if that might be a trigger.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's a tricky tricky business.
Oh my gosh! And you know, for those who missed it, you know, these are going to mature and then eventually get up towards St. Louis, which at least some in St. Louis. I haven't heard it meteorologically, but I've heard government officials say, as far as St. Louis proper, the storm they had, I think it was on Saturday, was the worst, at least in memory. And of course, Kentucky got hit. Really
London, Kentucky got hit very, very badly. Joplin, Missouri, another place that's in the bullseye for this. Tulsa, Fayetteville, Arkansas, Kansas City even. So this is a very large swath of not only a tornado risk, but there you saw wind risk and hail risk as well. I know specifically in Oklahoma, Kansas, southwestern Missouri, it's warned for up to softball, if not DVD-sized hail. So if you're...
Speak to me. What's DVD?
A DVD.
Oh, a DVD.
A DVD, yeah, or like a CD, you know, a DVD.
Once again, proving my age. What is a DVD?
Yeah, if you have a Blu-ray player, or you know, let's say you're a gamer, Tim, and you got a PS5 or an Xbox.
Yes, okay.
I mean, that's the size of a DVD.
Wow. Gotcha.
That is how big, circumference-wise, you know, the hail could be. So I mean,
that could truly be deadly.
Oh yes. I mean, catastrophic damage just from the hail, let alone, you know, the wind and tornado risk. So we'll be watching for this event. Here's kind of the future cast throughout the rest of tonight and then into really about the next 2 days or so. So those storms continuing to develop. They swing off to the east. There you can see the line making its way through St. Louis and Memphis. Tomorrow afternoon and evening, kind of what you would consider perhaps bluegrass country, Tim, or the heartland, Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio. They're going to get a nice line of storms. This works its way then down towards Birmingham, northern sides of the Atlanta metro by late tomorrow night. And then eventually it will head our way, Tim.
But should be, of course, much, much weaker.
Yes.
And I think we're kind of hoping for maybe a little bit of rain.
Yeah, we need some. Things have dried out a good bit since last week.
So as you go to our temperatures, which are certainly hot, well above average, but maybe we're going to stay just below the record. So we got the record on Friday. We did not get it Saturday. We're pretty close yesterday. And folks may wonder, you know, so what happened there? Although computer models are much better now than they used to be, but from the 80s to now, when we're talking about near record heat, very often we're looking at both where's the sea breeze, but then also I think the almost iffier part of the forecast is we know there's going to be some cirrus cloud activity.
That's what I was going to say. There was a lot of cloud cover.
It was pretty thick on Saturday.
Yep.
How thick will it be? And I also bring that up now because just so folks know, not all the time, but very often, those cirrus clouds are debris from the severe storm event that we're talking about well off to our west and northwest. And they get caught on the downslope or the eastern side of the ridge. They slide southeast. Very often don't produce thunderstorms. Now there was a narrow line, of course, that came through the Brunswick area on Sunday, but that has always been a big question when we're having these record levels. Is we know we're going to be on the downslope side. We're probably not going to have thunderstorms, but you know how much of the cirrus clouds, and that can make a few degrees difference, which then becomes near record versus record, right?
Well, and even yesterday with that storm up towards Brunswick. There was a nice outflow boundary from that. I was outside grilling, and it was probably between about 4:30 and 5, and it dropped our temperatures at least a few degrees for a couple of minutes. Nice cool breeze swept on through, and then it did heat back up once the clouds cleared a little bit. And
I was watching the airport because I was curious to see if the airport was going to make it to the record, and they made it to 95, so within a degree. But yeah, I think if they wouldn't have got that very weak outflow boundary, they probably would have had the record.
Would have been close.
Yep.
Here's tonight, Tim.
Yeah, I mean warm, but after you showed me those dew points, I'm going, our dew points still not as high as they were in southeast Oklahoma. That's just maybe at Mayport might be more like a 70, 71 degree dew point. So the dew points are coming up, but they're still not quite as juicy as it is out west of the Mississippi. Nonetheless, that graphic pretty much paints the story.
And that's why our heat index isn't higher than this. Temperature-wise, mid-90s. I think the upper echelon of the heat index for most of us, so especially around Jacksonville and those areas, are going to be anywhere between about 102 and 103. Now, if you live down near like Orange Park along the St. John's, or you live out towards Mayport, or I would maybe toss in St. Augustine with that. The heat index could be a little bit higher in a few spots. Probably, I guess maybe not St. Augustine so much. Mayport and Orange Park.
maybe St. Augustine right on the bayfront or out toward the island.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you brought that up, because as much as the thermometer readings are summer-like or even a little above average summer, I would suspect you all, talking about those of you, Ross, that are still going to be working here at the station, that you're going to have some mid-90 events in especially July, but where the dew points are in the mid and upper 70s, and that heat index is going to be into truly dangerous levels, right? Get up toward 110.
God, I hope not.
I mean, it's almost a given, though. You'll at least have a couple days in the mid-90s, a couple days where your dew points in the mid-70s. So we're not even talking about records, right? It's not a stretch to say that. But to where that is, as hot as it feels now,
it's going to get worse. It's later this summer.
That what to me shows that it's May versus if it's late June through maybe the first or second week of August. You're probably going to have at least middle 70 dew points.
The other thing I know we talked about last summer, that because the dew points were so high, right? So the water in the oceans, they're warming. They're higher than they have been. Mm-hmm. Because the water temperatures are a little bit higher, that dew point stays a little bit higher. Mm-hmm. The overnight lows don't cool down nearly as much.
Right.
So really, you almost never get relief then.
Right.
And that's kind of what kept our average temperature last year much higher than before, because our morning lows were so warm. It's probably typical to see, mid 90s here through July and August. But instead of morning lows around 70,
right,
we were getting morning lows 74 to 75 pretty consistently last year, I feel like.
Yep, and you hear from health experts that say that especially if someone doesn't have AC or their AC's busted, that there are the extreme events that happen when it's hot and you're out in the sun. But for those that sort of get they get the long-term heat stroke or heat exhaustion, it's because it doesn't cool down at night. And so they're not sleeping well, their body's staying hot and elevated the whole time. And especially if they're elderly, those are the people, we really are concerned about.
And they really aren't getting that much needed rest. Now, there is some relief on the way. That's the good news.
Yep.
Wednesday, there's going to be a chance for some isolated to scattered showers and thunderstorms. We're thinking primarily shortly after lunchtime, and then into the afternoon. So until the storms arrive, it's still going to be very hot, very humid. Tim has it painted for you there. Mid-90s. Best chance of rain, Tim, I'm kind of thinking pretty much from Brunswick over through the Okefenokee.
Yeah, so line could actually start breaking down a little bit as it heads toward us.
Yeah, so as it heads, a little bit further to the south and southeast, and the model will show that here, pretty much more isolated as it goes. So here's about 1:30. I think the latest one just came in. So I haven't actually gotten to see what this looks like. So there's about 3:30, 4 o'clock. Again, this isn't going to be a widespread event for the most part. I'm kind of thinking a broken line at most. Just some scattered storms along that frontal boundary as it works its way through. And
then even if you get it, I suspect it's probably going to be less than a quarter of an inch because it's going to be pretty quickly.
Yeah, probably not a whole lot of heavy downpour. So this will all pretty much clear out by sunset Wednesday evening, or at least that's what we're thinking. So heading out to the Jumbo Shrimp perhaps on Wednesday night, you should be okay. There might be a few thunderstorms or at least showers around during warm-ups, but I think by first pitch, Tim, you're looking pretty good.
I mean, if that's the night, I'd still keep it and just because I think you have some decent hope, but then we're really looking good Thursday and Friday.
And that's because of the drier air moving in.
Here it comes.
So there's the moisture on Wednesday with that front. Behind it then, much drier air brought in. That is going to makes it feel much nicer. So it's going to be less humid. And really the morning lows, I think, are going to benefit the most. If not, we're going to benefit the most.
I think I even used the term fresh on Friday.
Okay, I don't have that in here.
Okay, yeah, I think so. At least
Friday. But I do have our morning lows painted.
There you go, yeah. So I'm thinking, 64, 62.
We're always talking about the highs.
Right.
I want to give the lows some love.
I'm with you.
Try to stay optimistic this week. It's a Monday. People are going to power through here.
Yeah.
4 more days left in the work week. But yeah, check out Friday morning, Saturday morning, low to mid 60s. That's pretty nice, cool, fresh start there.
Yeah. As we head in toward Memorial Weekend and Jazz Fest weekend.
Yeah, big weekend here for downtown Jax. Looks pretty dry for the most part. Maybe an isolated shower Sunday afternoon or evening, but even that looks pretty slim. So otherwise, afternoon highs going to be just a few degrees above average, upper 80s and lower 90s. And it looks like you'll probably have to wait until next Monday, so this time next week, to see another chance of rain or storms after Wednesday's chance.
Notice I've zipped it. I don't know if we're supposed to stop now.
All right. Well, we can't. Yeah. Are we good to go, Jackson?
Jackson's not listening.
Oh, yeah. Let's go.
Okay. Well, that's all we got, folks. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your week. Try and stay cool out there.